All right, talking head video time with the approach of AMD's new socket, the new AM5 and the new lineup of processors. With that comes a whole influx of questions that people ask me whether or not it's worth it to wait for it. So we're gonna talk about some things to think about whether or not you want to adopt a brand new platform and the kind of headaches that can typically come with that. Bring your setup to the next level with CableMod's all-new custom coiled keyboard cables. Available in a variety of colors and connector types utilizing best-in-class connectors, the keyboard cables give your setup a look and feel it deserves. To see the complete lineup of custom keyboard cables available from CableMod, click the link in the description below. All right, so what I'm gonna say here applies to both Intel and AMD. It's just AMD has the newest socket launching in terms of timing of making this video. So I'm gonna give you some things to think about, not just specific to AMD, but just to the concept of adopting something bleeding edge. So this is a talking head video. Feel free to minimize it so you don't have to look at this inconveniencing your pixels on your screen. This is just informational, nothing really. I have only sat in here, so it's prettier looking, okay? Anyway, moving forward, AMD's new AM5 socket is gonna be the first time we've seen AMD go back to an LGA setup, which means pins are located on the motherboard rather than the CPU. For a very long time. We haven't seen that in a really long time with AMD, years and years and years and years. So with that is gonna be new chipsets, obviously the adoption of DDR5 RAM, because right now AMD's AM4 and Threadripper are still on DDR4. There's going to be, I believe, PCIe Gen 5, and obviously an entirely new CPU architecture. The LGA and the pin array with AMD had to evolve because of the density that the CPU is and the fact that there's only so much you could do with so many pins, and it had to change. And going LGA allows them to have a higher pin density while also not having it be so delicate that if you breathed on it wrong, you would cause damage. That's why LGA is why the high pin density, that's why Threadripper is also LGA. But anyway, moving forward, when you have a new architecture, there's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of teams involved in this. Like a new GPU, it's just the GPU team. And then you might need maybe the driver team, WCAG certification for Microsoft, if it's even truly WCAG certified anymore these days. I digress, doesn't matter. It's all kind of contained in one package on getting the thing ready. But with a CPU, you've got the CPU manufacturer, in this case is AMD, providing the socket spec, which is also AMD and AM5. But then you have all of the motherboard manufacturers. Right, you've got your different chipsets that are gonna launch. You're gonna have your high-end overclocking chipset, you'll have your mainstream chipset, you have your budget chipset, you have your workstation chipset, like all these kind of predefined chipsets and dip switches and toggle switches that are on and off in each platform to kind of meet the needs of that particular buyer in that segment. But you have all the different AIBs. And by AIBs, or motherboard manufacturers as well, add-in board partners, which I guess is more of a GPU term, but whatever, it still applies here. You have your Gigabytes, your ASRoCs, you've got your EVGAs now in AMD, which is really crazy to say. Your MSI and just all of these brands, Asus, obviously. And all of them approach the build of the motherboard differently. So you're gonna have a lot of BIOS out there that have to speak to the microcode of the CPU. You're gonna have a lot of different approaches to creating the same end result, which is making the AM5 socket CPU work on their motherboards. And what I have found through all of the years of adopting day zero because we usually have it prior to launch, the experience we typically have when we receive it versus when the public receives it is sometimes night and day. And even then, the public release BIOS, the public release motherboards, the public release everything is usually a step or two progressed past where we get it as reviewers because of the early access stuff. So if that gives you any indication of how fast things move with new platforms in terms of upgrades, stability, updated BIOS, it's kind of insane. If you look at the history of AMD BIOS, there are usually in the first month, 4, 5, 6 BIOS sometimes, after a new platform has launched. And that's because as more memory becomes available, the speeds of memory is constantly changing, the timing of memory is constantly changing. That alone can trigger entire BIOS updates. You're gonna have, typically you'll see BIOS patch notes or something along the lines of like improved stability, which is very generic. But the way that the chipset interacts with the PCIe lanes on the CPU, the way that the CPU interacts obviously with the chipset and with the memory, there's so many pieces here that it takes time for all of that to get ironed out and become completely stable. I'm gonna tell you right now, the most frustrating time for any new platform for us around here is when we decide, hey, a new platform's out, we should see what it's like, let's build and use it on day 0. And usually it is a complete cluster. I mean, we had so many issues when Threadripper first came out versus where it is today. We had so many issues when Ryzen first came out versus what we have today. And that's why I would tell people who are, and the common question that I get right now, which is why I'm making this video, is should I get Ryzen now or should I wait for AM5? So my answer to that ultimately is gonna be, do you want the latest and greatest? And with that, the headache that could come along with waiting for stability improvements in a new platform? Or do you want something that's proven now to work, has a huge amount of support, a huge amount of experience in that particular platform? And if you hear any buzzing sounds, I apologize, our 3D printer is going over there, and it's not the quietest one, but anyway, I digress. You're gonna have to ask yourself, do you want stability, but with no future upgradability, because AM4 is dead-ended. There is a cutoff date at which no new stuff will be coming out for that. It's all moving over to AM5. Or do you want to adopt the new platform, but the headaches that come along with it? The headaches are typically gonna be things like random blue screens, potential boots fine 1 minute, boot looping the next, requiring a clear CMOS to even get back to your settings type of thing. Issues I've experienced with AM4 when it first came out was BIOS updates that actually bricked the board entirely. I mean, that was more of a very first gen Ryzen thing back in 2016 when the 1700X, 1800X and all that was out and the X370 socket. I can't tell you, at least 3 or 4 times I've had BIOS completely brick a motherboard. Most of the time BIOS flashback features, which didn't widely exist on motherboards then, which you can kind of find now even on more budget motherboards, would often fix the problem, but I had a couple that were just complete hard bricks, dead, that's it, no more, kaput. We have one that we still have the box for it labeled Titanic because that one literally sunk. It just completely obliterated itself in a BIOS update. And these are the kind of things that you might adopt. And we have a mentality around here, we don't update BIOS unless we absolutely have to for this very reason. The problem is when you're on the brand new platform, BIOS updates are almost a necessity. What you can find is you might change RAM. You might later on so it's probably a little less likely on AM5 because you're gonna have to get new RAM, which is DDR5 to work. If you're updating from AM4, DDR4 is more than likely not gonna work unless they go the route Intel did where they'll have DDR4 boards and DDR5 boards, but it's still unknown whether or not what features you'll be giving up potentially with going with DDR4 versus DDR5. But if that's an option, I would go with DDR4, honestly, just because of the fact that that RAM is more than likely to work on AM5 out of the box better and more widely than DDR5 will on a brand new platform. So these are the kind of things you need to think about. Another thing that tends to happen too when a new platform comes out is I always feel like the next CPU comes out much closer to the release date of the first gen CPU than say the successors. So AM4 had 1700X, 1800X come out, and then inside of a year, I wanna say it was more like 10 months, we had the 2000 series processors come out. And with the 2000 series processors brought an improved IPC, improved memory stability, improved fabric clock speeds, all of these things that made the first to second gen improvement, like just on the charts, it was kind of insane how much farther ahead core for core the 2000 series processors were versus the 1000 series processors. Fortunately, they all use the same motherboard and stuff. So there was forward compatibility there. But if you might take a chance of buying a new CPU and then having it get replaced with something newer, faster, or better, because when they make a new manufacturing process, the first process tends to run a little hotter, requires a little more voltage, and it's not quite as fast because the manufacturing process hasn't been as refined, so they don't push the clock speeds as hard. They provide a little more voltage to make it work, and then over time, they start to really dial in and fine-tune the process to where they get a little more clock speed, a little less voltage, a little better heat management. So you might find yourself regretting getting day one processor when, months or maybe a year down the road, you get faster, more stable, cooler speeds, and a year worth of improvements in BIOS and manufacturing on the motherboards themselves. Think of it as like a new car. There's like this saying in the car world, never buy the first model year of any update. The first model year, you are the beta tester for that car. It's not until they get these cars out in the road, widely sold, hundreds of thousands of miles across all these vehicles, right? Do they start getting information back? Like, okay, we're seeing this problem pop up a lot. So let's create a TSB, let's have a repair, and then you start coming in for warranty repairs and stuff. They already know about the problem. The thing is, when they sell those cars and the first cars go out, they have no information other than what little testing they did driving around the United States or wherever they're testing the vehicle in a very narrow test case. So once you get 20, 50, 100,000 cars out in the market, you start to realize there is a reoccurring theme here. The very same thing happens with CPUs and motherboards and brand new platforms. So if you're willing to, I guess, test on your dime, it's very rare that you don't get improvements over time, that you just get bricked hardware and you're upset with your purchase. It's gonna be faster than 5000 series Ryzen. Absolutely no doubt about that. It's going to have future compatibility. I'm sure they'll use the AM5 socket for quite a while. They're getting DDR5 with it, which is, if you're doing anything that's RAM intensive, DDR5 is absolutely insane how fast it is versus DDR4 even. If you're willing to wait out that adoption period and wait for stability improvements in terms of BIOS and even sometimes microcode. Sometimes they even update the microcode for the CPU that also can take place through a BIOS, where the CPU itself needs some tuning or tweaking. But if you're willing to adopt that and embrace that period of time, then sometimes, I mean, people like me, I'm an enthusiast of all of it, so I do enjoy that period, although sometimes it comes with very frustrating, weird side effects and bugs that are going to be in the platform no matter what. If you're the kind of person that's like, no, I'm building the system for gaming and work, I need it to work, I cannot go to turn on my computer and have it suddenly not boot and it's just doing weird things and freezing and throwing lights and I don't know what's happening and I'm clearing CMOS and it's not starting and I'm figuring out that I have to pull the power plug 3 times, push the power button 5 times and turn on a circle twice and then it will turn on. If you don't want that life, you don't want the very first day one of any new platform before any stability improvements have come along. AM4, all the way, call it a day, don't look back, and don't think about the fact that if you'd wait a little bit longer, you could have a new platform, because you'd be in that scenario I just explained if you don't want that. All right, I hope this video is kind of giving you some food for thought. It's just kind of something for me to direct people to when they keep asking me the same question. I can just be like, watch this video, and I'm curious. How many of you out there are going to adopt AM5? AMD has made a huge impact on Intel's bottom line in terms of CPU adoption, in terms of mainstream and enthusiast CPU market. I'm curious as to how many people are going to jump to AM5. Obviously, we'll be using it. Every system here, except for mine right now, is AMD. I'm personally using a 12th gen 12900K, the little box that I built for my daily system, and Phil and Nick have heard some expletives come out of my mouth because of what it's been like using that, and we are still not on day 0 on that. We are progressed. Just the other day I had to figure out why the hell my system literally would not give a display. And that's just what you deal with new stuff. All right guys, thanks for watching. Sign off down below what your future plans are. Adopting AM5, sticking with AM4, buying AM4, going Intel. What are you getting and why? Sign off down below guys, and we'll see you in the next one.